Well, hi, everybody, and we have an exciting book review today. And our reviewer is Mary Ann Monroe, and she's going to be reviewing The Lost City of the Monkey God, a True Story by Douglas Preston. And Mary Ann is the School Library Systems Director for GST BOCES, overseeing the school libraries in 22 districts in the GST region. She was formerly a high school librarian, an office and financial manager for the Park Church, and a paralegal. This book is the story of Douglas Preston's archaeological journey into the Amazon and how what he discovered could foretell the fate of humankind. So Mary Ann is going to be doing the review, and I'm asking people to mute during the review so that we don't have background noise. And please hold your questions till the end after her talk and type them into chat, and I'll read them in the order that I get them. So without further delay, Mary Ann?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am so excited to see all of you. So it sounded like a great book, didn't it? I know. So are you ready for a ride into the Honduran jungle? No. Barb actually asked me why I picked this book and why I picked this book. I usually don't reread books, I have to say. I'm kind of a one-time read girl. So I selected this book because after I read it the first time, it really stuck with me as a foreshadowing of what might happen to us in today's world. All those years ago, you wouldn't think that a lost civilization would maybe tell us how we should live our lives, but sometimes history speaks to the future, doesn't it? So anyway, I'm grateful to be here. I'm so glad Barb invited me. Some of you I know, Dr. and Mrs. Prussell. Some of you I don't, but I am Mary Ann, the librarian. I know, it always makes the kids laugh when I say that because it rhymes. And I'm going to take you on a little journey through this book. And I'm really excited to share this with you. I'm kind of glad you hadn't read it because it's super cool. I'm a nonfiction girl by trade, I have to say. I'm not so big, I'm a school librarian. You would think that I'm a fiction person, but I actually love nonfiction, especially the nonfiction that reads like a story. I think for our youth and for our littles and for our young adults in school, that nonfiction is a great way for them to explore the world without having to leave their school libraries. So I'm excited to share a nonfiction story with you today. And this book I like nonfiction that's dense but not overwhelming and technical. So this certainly reads like a story. And if you didn't know that it was nonfiction, you would definitely think it was a world of fiction. So we're going to travel. Are you ready to travel? Y'all have to look excited about traveling. We'll see if I can make the screen work. That's always the tail of the tape, isn't it? Look, I even cleaned up my screen today so it didn't look like the hot mess that Mary Ann is. So this is the cover art from Lost City of the Monkey God. The author is Douglas Preston, and it was a copyright of 2017. And of course, that's me that's going to present. So here's your hook. You ready? A 500-year-old legend, a curse, a dangerous jungle, a reject from Stanford, a drug smuggler, a cinematographer, and the Honduran president. They all come together in this medical mystery tale that may foretell the downfall of our own civilization. So this is really the true story, the discovery of an ancient pre-Columbian city in an unexplored valley in my Spanish is bad, forgive me for those of you that are linguists, I am not. La Mosquita is how they pronounce it, and it is kind of like the Mosquitaville of Honduras, apparently. So that's a little picture of kind of where we are in our story. Can you see the map okay? So we're hanging out down here, way down there. I tried to kind of pick some pictures that I thought these didn't come out very well, but have a better sense of, where we are in the travel of our book. So the story originated with the legend of the White City. Ciudad Blanca is Spanish for White City. And there were stories throughout the ages about this lost city in Honduras. And people would talk about it as this forbidden place, and it was cursed and shouldn't go there. And so everybody heard about it. Lots of people claimed to have found it, but nobody really had visited it. So Hernan Cortez in 1526, in his fifth letter to Emperor Charles V, talked about this lost city and said that it existed and it was full of riches and it had gold. And so, of course, as soon as that happens, everybody's all over this. So they all want to find the lost city. So it continues throughout history, really, that people have explored the Honduran jungles to find the lost city, and basically, unfortunately, in hopes of plundering and using its riches to benefit themselves. John Lloyd Stevens had an expedition there in the 1830s. The Mormons funded an expedition in the 1900s, interestingly enough, because they believed that this was a source of religious power for them, and they believed it was like the originating place for the Mormon religion, which I thought was kind of interesting that they funded that. William Duncan Strong from the Smithsonian traveled out in 1933 to visit this and find the site. And George Gustav Hay and Theodore Mord were pretty much instrumental in making this happen. I'm going to stop my share for just a second. I want to talk more about Mord. Fascinating. He was a guy that his dad had money. He sold petroleum, I think a petroleum company, to the Rockefellers. So there was a lot of money there. And this was his son, and he just loved to collect things. So he didn't really have to work. And so he found himself really interested in antiquities and developed a collection that ultimately became part of the Smithsonian's collection. And so he hired a lot of people to go out and find this lost city, but he was gullible. And the people that he hired, they lied. So they wanted to profit for themselves. So they would tell him, they would go out and explore, but they weren't really looking for the lost city. So he hired 3 different people, and all 3 people totally pulled the wool over his eyes. They went out, they hunted, they came back with all these fancy stories. The public was like, all excited. Everybody got all, there's a lost city, and then there's gold, and there's riches, and we're going to find it. And none of it was true. None of them had actually looked for the lost city. And how this is a really great part of the research of the book. How this happened is people would bring back things and say, I found this. Like, I found this at the lost city, but they had actually just purchased it. So they had gone and found things that they purchased in a market or purchased from other people along the way and taken them back and said that they came from the lost city. Now, these were put in the collection, and you remember I say it ultimately became part of the Smithsonian collection. The thing about it is apparently when antiquities get put in a collection, usually the journals and the accompanying field notes of the folks that have discovered them also get placed in the museum. In this case, the journals did not get placed with the artifacts. So in comes our author. So he decides, I wonder why the journals aren't here. So he contacts the family of this Mord and says, do you have the journals? They have the journals, believe it or not. They just never got placed with the artifacts. He somehow gets his hands on the journals. All 3 of them, reads them, and there is absolutely no doubt, like there was nothing in the journal about the lost city. Like it was all about him, the Mord, out looking for gold. Nothing in there connected the collections to an actual search and a find of a lost city. So the journals, if they had been part of the collection, would have certainly told the tale that this was not reality. And I tell my kids, like when I teach them to do research, you have to do lateral research. You can't just look at one thing and take it for granted. So apparently even the Smithsonian got fooled, didn't follow up, didn't do their own research, and the antiquities were categorized as belonging to the lost city, which I thought was actually a pretty neat part of our educational journey into how we should find things and how we need to look at things in a more whole cloth exploration. After this came Sam Glassmeyer. He was a geologist. Glassmeyer was a pretty cool dude. I wrote some notes on him. He worked at the Jet Propulsion Labs in Los Alamos and worked on nuclear bombs. And then somebody hired him because he was a geologist to go out and look for gold. And he kind of went the opposite route. Glassmeyer just couldn't stand being out there looking for gold. He wanted to find the lost city. He heard tales, the Honduran people that he encountered would tell tales of the story. So he went out. He didn't look for gold, which he was supposed to do. Instead, he went to look for ruins, which he actually found. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So we've got Glassmeyer. We've got all these people that are looking for a lost city. But then, is there a lost city? Nobody had found it. Glassmeyer found some ruins. But this is the legend. When the conquistadors arrived, Ciudad Blanca was a magnificent city. Then came an unforeseen series of catastrophes. The people decided the gods were angry, so they abandoned the city, leaving all their belongings behind, and thereafter shunned it as a forbidden place. So it seems as though anybody that looks for the lost city kind of dies. I know, there's the bad part. So lots of bad things happen to these people along the way as they search for this lost city. They would get sick. They would mysteriously disappear. They would die of some kind of unknown disease. So it seems that the legend is real, and it follows the folks that try and break the curse and find the city. The curse, of course, is passed down in the Honduran communities from generation to generation. And the Honduran, it was a real thing, actually. The book talks about trying to get people to go with them, to take them out to look for this lost city. Like, people did not want to do that because they thought they were going to die because of the curse. So I have to read you a little bit from the book because it wouldn't be right if I didn't. So this is what, normally I don't look for a book like this, but I have to say I can't remember where I was, someplace with the very handsome husband. And I picked this book up and I thought, oh, this is so cool. It's deep in Honduras in a region called La Mosquita, lies some of the last unexplored places on Earth. Mosquita is a vast, lawless area covering about 32,000 square miles, a land of rainforests, swamps, lagoons, rivers, and mountains. Early maps labeled it the gates of hell because it was so forbidding. This area is one of the most dangerous in the world for centuries, frustrating efforts to penetrate and explore it. Even now in the 21st century, hundreds of square miles of the Mosquita rainforest remain scientifically uninvestigated. In the heart of Mosquita, the thickest jungle in the world carpets relentless mountain chains, some a mile high, cut by steep ravines with lofty waterfalls and roaring torrents. Deluged with over 10 feet of rain a year, the terrain is regularly swept by flash floods and landslides. It has pools of quick mud that can swallow a person alive. The understory is infested with deadly snakes, jaguars, and thickets of catclaw vines with hooked thorns that tear at flesh and clothing. In Mosquita, an experienced group of explorers, well equipped with machetes and saws, can expect to journey 2 to 3 miles in a brutal 10-day trip. So as you can see, this was not for the faint of heart. People that traveled here to look for the lost city, they were meaning it. They were on a mission. So as I read the book more and more, it gets more and more exciting. It's not just the curse, it's not just the jungle. It's why can't anybody find it? Why doesn't anybody go there? Is there really a curse? Does it really kill people? It is a jungle. So these guys decided, well, let's go find this jungle. Let's go find this lost city. Let's go in. I'll tell you why they went in a minute, but I wanted to introduce you to some of the characters in the book. Douglas Preston, the author, you might know him. He writes a lot with Lincoln Child in the Pendergrass series, but he was a correspondent for the National Geographic, and that's kind of how he got hooked into this excursion. Woody, Andrew Woody Wood was the jungle expert. He was British military. Steve Elkins is a cinematographer who actually did all of the filming on this. And of course, Mr. Glassmeyer, our geologist, who went out looking for gold and found the ruins. Bill Benison was a filmmaker, and he actually financed the expedition. And Bruce Heinecke, I'll call him the procurer. We'll get to him in a minute. And Mabel, who's his wife. And then there's the Honduran president at the time, who was Pepe Lobo. So these are kind of the folks in the book that make this kind of weird, eclectic mix of folks that make this all come together and happen. So Elkins, of course, had been reading about the lost city and heard about it. And he was interested in it. But as you can imagine from the passage I just read, like going out into the Honduran jungle is not like a thing. You don't just decide to do it one day. And it's very difficult to find things because it's the jungle. So Elkins read this article in Archaeology magazine called Lasers in the Jungle, where it talked about how this new technology could help find things that you can't just see with your naked eye or see on the ground. And then Mabel, Bruce's wife, meets Pepe, the Honduran president. So Bruce is an interesting dude. Used to be a drug smuggler, and he apparently gets stuff done. If you don't like swearing, don't read Bruce's passages in the book. Bruce has a foul mouth, and he's the person that points the gun. So Bruce, we need an in, right? We got to get into the Honduran jungle. We got to figure out how we're gonna explore this place. How are we going to get permission? So Bruce's wife's father died, and then she went to the funeral, and lo and behold, the Honduran president happened to be in the church that's next Sunday. So Bruce sends her to say, he says, I don't care what you have to do, you have to meet with the Honduran president. So she runs up to him. Like after church is over, she runs up to him and says, Pepe, I need to speak with you. And she runs her way through his bodyguards and says, I have to talk to you. And he says, okay. And so they make a circle around her, and she asks him, have you ever heard of the legend of the lost city? And he says, yes. And he says, can you get us there? And she says, yes. And so that's how they got the Honduran government to agree to allow them to do the exploration, is by her interaction with him, just running up to him in the middle of church one day to say, please, please let us help. Now, you might think he was altruistic, but he wasn't. This would be good for Honduras. You have to remember, he was a fairly new president. He just gotten elected. So, and Honduras has had its share of issues, as you're well aware, that it's, politically and economically, they struggle. So finding a lost city under his tenure as president would be beneficial for him, and it would help Honduras grow and prosper in the eyes of the world. People would come there, it would be a thing. So it wasn't just, again, it wasn't just an altruistic gesture. Like, he had a motive, he had a reason for wanting to do this. And, she set it up basically, which was pretty cool. So then we travel on, in our story, and let me pull my PowerPoint back up. It might be a little cranky here. We'll see. Hopefully not. Can you turn screen sharing back on for me? Sorry, I lost it. So as they travel more, I want to stop here and talk a little bit about the Honduran culture. I put this slide in specifically because I think it's really important as background information. This was a great quote from the book. The people of Honduras don't have a clear cultural identity. We have to start learning more about the past in order to create a brighter future. And again, that's the Honduran president's interaction with Bruce's wife, Mabel, really sets the stage for this to learn more about themselves. The Honduran economy is one of the poorest in the America. Gangs, narcotics, corruption, it is not good there. The poverty rate is extraordinarily high, even among the elite, actually. And there's been political coups and national disasters that have really changed the country for the worst over, centuries. So the new president looking for a start. This is actually a picture of Steve Elkins with the Honduran president as he comes in to look at the site. So this was a really big deal for Honduras if this was really true that the lost city was really there. And again, they believe this, and this is why. As you'll notice, this brown swath is deforestation. So in some of the unexplored areas that you think is unexplored, when they get there, this is what it looks like. It's not really unexplored. People have moved in, and they call it the fruit company effect. There's a really great passage or chapter in the book that describes the role of the fruit companies in the downfall of the Honduras environment and economy. Actually, the fruit companies came in and they really took over, and they did pretty much whatever they wanted to, and they didn't give back to the community. They just kept it all as profit. So, and now the deforestation continues because in part, the fruit companies not giving back and plundering the environment basically kind of set the stage to let anybody else do that. So, it's a very poor country and people do what they have to do to survive. Unfortunately, as noted, deforestation equals archaeological looting in lots of cases. People will come in to clear cut or for cattle or to grow crops or to grow drugs. And when they clear cut, they find archaeological sites and they just plunder it and sell it. I suspect that's kind of how Mord got some of his antiquities that he got off the black market, is from, people going in the jungle to do things they shouldn't, and he bought them. The McDonald's effect is something I wanted to talk about. There is a very telling passage in the book. The author is a pretty intelligent guy, and he asks a lot of questions because he's an investigative author. So when he got back and he's looking at the deforestation, he wanted to investigate more. And our environment is near and dear to all our hearts right now. And this is a really telling passage. It's actually a footnote in the book. It's the only footnote in the book, I think. But he says he later investigated the illegal clearing and who was responsible. The land southwest of Mesquite is one of the largest beef producing areas in Central America, with 750,000 grazing head. The surrounding ranches, legal and illegal, produce tons of meat for overseas markets, especially the United States. He was able to ascertain that after passing through several intermediaries, some of the illegal rainforest beef ends up in patties for McDonald's and other American fast food chains. And the rest of the annotation goes on to discuss how McDonald's got wind of him asking about this. And of course, there's a big uproar from McDonald's saying, oh no, we don't do that. That is not true. But it is true. And unfortunately, it's some of the things that we don't hear and see about, the deforestation of the jungle, is that these are really for-profit industries, and they really do in part, we do contribute to that as Americans, even though we might not realize it. And again, remember I said at the beginning, sometimes the history can foretell the future. So I was really interested in this, as you know, I'm kind of an environmental activist in my own right, and I really feel passionately about protecting our resources for the future. And the book does a really great job of outlining some of the problems in the history of Honduras and some of our contributions as a global society to what's happening in areas of the world that are unexplored and that need to be protected. So that's my sales pitch on the environment. Now, how'd they find this? Because you can't just walk in and go, oh, look, the lost city, as we talked about. So remember I talked about the article, Lasers in the Jungle? Well, that was LIDAR, which is kind of like radar, but it bounces a laser beam off objects and captures the reflection, and then it measures the amount of time between the bounce and the reflection. So it sends 125,000 infrared pulses a second, and the forest canopy is extraordinarily thick there. However, there are holes in the forest canopy, so there's so many of the beams they can penetrate in there. Then they gather all the data, and software changes it into topographical maps, basically. So to explore 50 square miles was $500,000, and that was in 2012. It was a lot of money to do this, but because of the article Elkins read about this, he was able to secure the funding to do this. And then they went in with a plane and did the topographical exploration, which was really, really pretty neat to hear about it. I want to just share this little piece of the book with you because I thought it was really fascinating. Dr. Prusa will tell you I'm not very technologically sound, but it says here, the resolution of the LiDAR image is only as good as how well you keep track of the position of the plane flying through space. This is the greatest technological challenge. In order to achieve high resolution, you need to track the plane's position in 3 dimensions during every second of flight to within an inch. I just thought that was fascinating. Can you imagine being over the jungle? It was kind of the picture of the plane they had was like, this thing was not all that. It was pretty, it didn't look like I'd want to get in it for sure. And to be able to track that and do all their geolocating within like 1 inch, I thought that was pretty fascinating. And the sections in the book about the technology and the use of LiDAR are really worth reading. I'm not a technical person, but the way he writes it, even I understood it, and it was really interesting to learn how they explored, to pick what they explored first and to explore it with the LiDAR. So they identified 4 sections that they thought the lost city could be in. There was T1, which was originally identified by Ron Bloom, who was with the Jet Propulsion Labs, and he identified it. This is such a cool technology thing. He identified the area from radar images from the space shuttle, which I thought was super cool. Like, how often does that happen? So you have to, I mean, all the space shuttle, like, it's far, So they took these images and he's like, oh, I see this. They identified T2, T3, and T4. T4 was where Glassmeyer found the ruin. You remember before, the guy that wanted to find the gold but really didn't. So T4 was actually, if we go back 1 or 2, that is T4. So unfortunately, when they got to T4 on the ground, they flew over it for more to do more reconnaissance with the LiDAR. They ruled that out because the deforestation, and they figured it had already been looted and anything there would have been taken away. But they left these T1, T2, and T3 areas to be explored. So what do we know about them? So now it's May 5th, 2012, right? We fly over it with our LiDAR, we upload the data, and there's a picture of them looking at what they found. So they see cities, like you can tell now, like it was really big. It was large. Remember, T1 was 20 square miles. So, and T2 and T3 were about that same size. So they see three major clusters of larger structures, as well as a plaza, a public space par excellence, a possible ball court, and many house mounds. They estimated that the site dated from the late or post-classic period between 8,500 and 1,000. And it's not Mayan. I'm going to tell you that. There's my spoiler alert. It's not a Mayan civilization. T2 was intriguing, but really hard to interpret. That was, remember, kind of in a basin. And they, because of the steepness of the cliffs next to it, they had trouble with the data. And T3, they said it's a big city. Copan, it's about comparable in geographic area to the core of Copan, about 2 square miles. So they've found this. The LIDAR has laid it out for them. They now know that something's there, right? But nothing is really found until you find it on the ground. So just because you think it's there from the air doesn't mean it's really there. So now they have to mount an expedition. So 3 years later, they're going to the jungle. And again, there's only one way in, and it's this really narrow passage, because remember, you have to get a crew in there. You're going to have to fly in there. You're going to have to maybe land a helicopter so you don't have to like cut through the jungle to get in there. So they found the space they think they can get in. And so they're out there, and Preston's, they get there and they fly in and they land and they find a good spot. And Preston says, as I looked around, I thought to myself that I had been right, and this was not all the scary place it had been made out to be. And again, it felt like Eden. Well, I would like to read to you about Steve Elkins and Mr. Preston's Eden, because it was anything but. Remember I talked about Woody, who was the British SAS guy? Well, Woody had warned them. He had warned them about lots of things. He had tried to scare them. They thought, well, he's just being overly dramatic. He's trying to scare us. So here's a passage that, okay, Barb Prusa will tell you I hate snakes. I do not like snakes. They're not my favorite things in the world. They are not. And so Preston is talking about Woody, and he's kind of like, this is at the beginning, so he's kind of like, yeah, right. He's going, well, we only have 7 doses of venom or anti-venom. And they're like, oh, that's a problem. Why? And they're like, well, you know. And so the venom was really expensive, the anti-venom. Again, the procurer, Bruce, had managed to secure 7 doses, but he couldn't get any more than that. And they almost canceled the expedition because they only had 7 doses. And at this point, Preston is kind of like, He says, I remember a number of people looking uneasy about that, me included. So then he gets there and he's like, oh, you know, he really was trying to scare us. We got in. It's not bad at all. So he's there. He's got his hammock set up. He's thinking, this is pretty neat. It's beautiful here. So he's going back to his hammock for the night. Actually, I think he wanted to go get his notepad to take more notes. And he says, somebody was talking about dengue fever. Woody said he had it twice. Don't want to get that. So he says, as the night deepened, the sandflies came out in numbers. Much smaller than mosquitoes, they looked like white moths drifting in the light of the lantern, so small that they made no noise, and normally you don't feel them biting, unlike mosquitoes. The more the night deepened, the more sandflies collected around us. Eager to record some of the stories being told, I hurried back to my hammock on the other side of camp to fetch my notebook. My new headlamp was defective, so Juan Carlos loaned me a crank flashlight. I made my way back without difficulty, but on my return, everything looked different in the dark. I halted, hemmed in by dense vegetation, realizing I had somehow veered off my rudimentary trail. The nighttime rainforest was black and alive with noise, the air thick and sweet, the leaves like a wall surrounding me. My flashlight's feeble beam was fading. I took a minute to frantically crank it up to a greater brightness, and then I played it carefully over the ground, looking for my tracks in the forest litter or any sign of the trail I'd hacked with my machete earlier in the day. Thinking I saw tracks, I moved in that direction, walking quickly, pushing aside the undergrowth with a growing sense of relief, only to be blocked by a mammoth tree trunk. I had never seen this tree before. Disoriented, I had stumbled deeper into the jungle. I took a moment to catch my breath and get my heart rate down. I could neither hear my companions nor see the light from where they were gathered. I thought of calling out to them, asking Woody to come get me, but decided not to expose myself as an idiot this early into the expedition. After intently examining the ground and cranking up the light several more times, I finally found my real tracks and retraced them, bent over and peering at the jungle floor, each time waiting to advance until I had located the next scuff mark or depression. A few minutes later, I spied a freshly cut leaf laying on the ground, its stem oozing sap, and then another. I was back on the trail. Following the slashed leaves and vines like breadcrumbs, I retraced the trail to the center of the camp, where I gratefully recognized Juan Carlos' hammock. Thrilled to be safely back in camp, I circled the hammock, probing the walls of the forest with my light for the path that would take me to where the rest of the group was chatting. That would be easy. I could now hear the murmur of voices and see the light of the Coleman lantern peeking through the vegetation. On my second circle of the hammock, I froze as my beam passed over a huge snake. It was coiled up on the ground just to the side of Juan Carlos's hammock, 3 feet away from where I stood. Impossible to miss, the snake was the opposite of camouflaged. Even in the dim flashlight beam, it looked practically aglow, the patterns on its scaly back brilliantly etched against the gloomy night, its eyes 2 bright points. It was staring at me in the striking position. Dude, it was a fer de lance. I know. So the picture of the snake, like that picture of the snake, that scary, scary picture, snake picture. Here, let me bring it back up for you. The scary snake picture is like they had to kill the snake. He felt bad, because he said it was very beautiful, but it was like he's a pretty tall guy, and the head picture I just can't handle, so I left some of that off. So the fer de lance, Woody actually killed the snake, and it, of course, it spit venom all over him, and he had to wash himself right off. And he did have an open cut, but he didn't have to take any of the anti-venom. So when I tell you they're in the forest, they are in the forest jungle. They are in over their heads, some of them. And you have to remember, like Woody, the British soldier, he was trained to do this. He was trained to be in the jungle, but these guys are not. They're cinematographers, they're photographers, they're archaeologists. This is not like exploring an archaeological site usually doesn't mean that you're killing like a 6-foot snake that's going to eat you. So they get there and they find the lost city. It was really there. In 2015, somebody yells, "Hey, there's some weird stones over here." And they found this cache containing over 500 pieces of archaeological material. And it was a ritual collection, they called it, a special feature of the lost cities in this valley. They are not seen in the Maya culture or elsewhere, and they hold the key to what distinguishes the people of Mosquitia from their neighbors and defines their place in history. And if you remember, this is what Pepe Lobo really wanted for his country. He really wanted his people to have that sense of who they were and where they came from, and for others to understand it too, instead of being this kind of extant people who everybody say descended from the Mayan culture. So I really love, I'm not going to tell you any more about the discovery part because I want you to read the book. And it was super awesome to learn about what they found and where they found it and how they found it. But now here comes the part that I don't know. Okay, I'm going to stop. Are y'all ready for this part? Because this is the part that's like today. This is going to freak you out. I know. So be prepared to be freaked out. This is what the legend came from. Here's the belief. So I'm going to summarize the end. The belief is that, remember, I told you this culture just got wiped out. Like, if you'll read the book, you'll find it like these people basically left this stuff and ran. So the belief is that it was a pandemic that wiped out this culture. I know. Did I not tell you this was the scary part? It was a pandemic that they believe that wiped out this culture. There were 600,000 people they believe in this population. And they have estimates of how many were killed in wars and how many were captured in the slave trades. Almost all the rest, 400,000 people died of the disease. Those are the pathogens introduced through the trade of goods and the trade of slaves. And that would be our friend, Mr. Columbus. As he traveled around, looking for riches and spreading religious information, he also spread disease. Now, the sad part in the book, and I'm not going to read the passage, nor did I quote it, but the sad part is it said that many indigenous cultures actually gained immunity from diseases because of the amount of rape that had occurred between the European explorers and the indigenous population. So there was so much rape of women that the women became, had children, they had a natural immunity. Very sad, but true. Sometimes we're not very nice to each other as a society, are we? So, but their belief, and this is what I read this book before COVID, mind you. I read this book probably, it must have been 2018. So it would have been, it was pre-COVID that I read this book. And I'm like, then COVID came, and I'm like, oh, Preston was so right. So it was, they really believe that is what happened. And again, when you read the book, you'll see that when they did their exploration, the site was indicative of a people that were just gone. Here one day, gone the other. The next plague that I'm going to introduce you to, and then I read the book, of course, and I'm telling my secretary, I'm like, that's the book. I read that book. I'm like, that's a plague. I'm like, that's what they died from. And then it gets worse because there's more. I know. So it's not bad enough. There's the plague. There's Leishmaniasis. So remember those sandflies? I read you that passage back on page 134. Okay. The sandflies carry a thing called Leishmaniasis, which is a parasitic tropical disease. I know. And that's what Leishmaniasis does to you. So several of the people in his expedition got Leishmaniasis. Leishmaniasis is not necessarily a curable disease, and it often deforms like your face. So it will eat into I know this is gross, but it eats into your nasal passages and any soft bone tissue and makes you deformed. And as you read in the book, a lot of the statuary and artifacts they found had people like with this grotesquely deformed, like facial, I know. So like they really think that it was either Leishmaniasis or like some kind of European induced disease that wiped this population out. Interestingly enough, there's a part in the book that talks about how they found a dinosaur, not this expedition, but another one found a dinosaur and it had a sandfly with it, and the sandfly and the dinosaur had Leishmaniasis. So even the dinosaurs got Leishmaniasis. And I was telling Sue about this book, my secretary. And so she pulls up this thing and she goes, I just read about this the other day. And so SARS is on this list of diseases that are going to wipe out society. 2 things underneath it is Leishmaniasis. I'm like, no. So I have to tell you that Leishmaniasis is a thing as our ecology changes because of the global impact of our actions. There is Leishmaniasis in America. It's in Texas. Like it's traveling because our societies are warming. Just pointing it out. I know. Now I told you should be scared of this book. He actually talks about conservation in the book too. And I thought this was a really nice way to put it, that conservation is a spiritual practice. this place, referring to the lost city, is right up there with the most important unspoiled places on earth. This was a forgotten place, but it ain't forgotten anymore. We live in a world gone crazy for resources. Everybody on Google Earth can look at this place now. If you don't move to protect it, it will disappear. Everything in the world is vulnerable. It's amazing to me that it hasn't been looted already. So the Honduran government did work pretty hard to protect it, but their looters got in. They did not, spoiler alert on this too, there was no way they could explore it all. It's really, really big. And T1 is big, T3 is bigger. So they really don't have it all explored yet, but it's pretty interesting to see what they found. And again, as I talk to my kiddos about research, truth over time disintegrates. So there's always truth in legend, and there's always legend in truth, isn't there? So I thought that this was how, an ancient civilization that morphed into this legend, and then the curse, and then the reality of the research shows that, that's not too far off. Like, really, it's not. And I think that especially with the Mord's diary, like, doesn't that show sometimes we're just gullible, and like, people just want to believe the news. They just want to believe that there's this cool lost city and they found it, and they don't really do the investigation about what really happened. Again, history mimics reality. So that's the end. And the last two sentences of the book says, no civilization has survived forever. All move toward dissolution, one after the other, like waves of the ocean falling upon the shore. None, including ours, is exempt from the universal fate. Again, I told you, it's so much like reality. It was a great, great book. I hope you read it and enjoy it like I did. I thought it was really, it's definitely a tale worth telling. And I gave you some links. I'll send this PowerPoint to Barb so that she has it if she wants to share it with you. So there's a link to Douglas Preston's site, and then the link to the book itself. And there's some of my book recommendations. Again, I'm a historical fiction and a nonfiction girl, but if you're really into the nonfiction, I gave you some great recommendations there, some things that I get really excited about. And I really like it when you all read young adult materials or littles, whatever your littles and your young adults, so that you can share it with your kids and your grandkids, because nothing excites kids more than knowing that adults are reading what they read. So if you have a chance, anything by Ruta Sepetys. I just read Salt to the Sea last week, and that is a great book about the Holocaust. Well, it's a very telling book about the Holocaust. Lori Halls Anderson has great information. She has a great series, Chained, Forged, that's out there. The Impossible Knife and Never Letting Go. Brother Band and Ranger's Apprentice are some of my favorite books. They're adventure books, and they're kind of like probably 8th grade read, but they're super cool. And anything by Mike Lupica or John Feinstein in sports, I get all excited about. So these are just some of my favorites that I love. Shadow Divers was a great book. And if you haven't read Unbroken, I would highly recommend that you listen to it as an audiobook. The reader on that was super good. So Unbroken is an amazing tale. I wanted to do that one, but I figured you all read it. And my last pitch is, don't forget, you all have access to your audiobooks on Libby and ebooks. And your kiddos and your grandkiddos, if they are in my GST region, all have access to Sora. And I have like 21,000 EDE and audiobooks on there for their to access. Any staff member, whether it's the bus driver, the cafeteria worker, or the superintendent, can access those materials. And any student from K to 12 in the GST region, all the way from Waverly to Alfred Alman, can access that. And don't forget, you can have access to your New York Public Library card too. All kiddos and staff actually have teachingbooks.net and PBS Learning Media too as part of their access from me. And Teaching Books, I want to show you just a little bit about that. I pulled it up. It's a great resource. So I pulled up the book that I just reviewed for you. And this is something that your students, parents, anybody can access if they're in GST. And it will give you a lesson. It will talk about like meet the author. It will go to his page. Some of them actually have the authors reading their own, like telling why they wrote books, which in their own voice. Some of these excerpts are super great for you to know. And there's my contact information. So again, I'll make sure that Barb and Jenny have this so that they can send it out to you if you want it. So a super cool read. It's a fast read. It's not very, I have 300 and some pages. It does have which I like, librarian thing. It has the citations in the back and it has a glossary. So it makes me happy. What questions do you have for me?
Wow, Marianne, what an interesting book.
It's a great book.
Yeah. We have a question. Let me pull it up. And the question is, are those artifacts still in the Smithsonian?
I don't know. So my notes will tell me. Let me tell you where I have a note what he started. The background of that, George Gustav Hay founded the Museum of the American Indian, which is now part of the Smithsonian. So I don't know if those artifacts of his still exist or not. I've only been, that's on my bucket list, the Smithsonian. I've only been once and I was younger with my mom and dad. So Mike and I have a plan to go visit the Smithsonian someday. I want to know now that you've asked that question, this librarian thing, now I want to know.
I have a question. What was the earliest creation of the city, of the 3 sites? Which site was created first? And
Now,
did they combine into a greater metropolis?
It did, and that's what they believe, Barb. They don't know because they haven't gotten to the other, like the T2 and the T3.
Right.
They can't really date it, but they believe that it, like we call it a city, but it was really an interconnected society of folks, that traveled among, each other and kind of lived commonly in a common area. So yeah, again, what we refer to as a city is not really a city. It was, it was their home. Like they all live there, and they do believe that T2 and T3 were kind of like offshoots of T1, and they were all like, it was all the same civilization.
So where was food produced? How was this sustainable? I mean, before the plague, before the terrible things that happened, where was the agricultural? Where was the?
He didn't really talk about that a whole lot. I assume that they had agricultural parts where they had, cut down the jungle and grew crops, and of course they were right by rivers. The rivers ran through there, and there was lakes, and and there were obviously game. When they went out to explore, they took some of the Honduran soldiers with them. It was a huge, the government, they had to have somebody, and they actually shot monkeys and ate them. So this, they basically lived off the land, like I assume, like the civilization did. They found all kinds of really cool roots and medicinal plants, though, while they were out there. Things that are super expensive to procure. And again, that's one of the problems with these archaeological sites. Like, they have such a trove of stuff, like people come in and just plunder them.
Yeah. So these were not nomadic people. These were people who were okay.
Yep, they had houses, they had temples, they had, religious structures in place. They called it the lost city of the monkey god because there was like a, the symbolic, the deformities, I wonder, their deformities perhaps caused by Leishmaniasis may have made the statuaries look more like monkeys than people. But some of the statuaries were monkey-like in appearance. There were lots of jaguars and lots of snakes.
Yeah.
Gross.
Well, I'm just looking to see if we have any more questions. Please put them in chat. And we'll have a few minutes to talk about them.
Are y'all going to go to the library and get the book? I think it's an audio book too. I did
Really?
not listen to it. I actually read it. That's a read for me. The audiobook thing is new to me. I'm old school, so you'll see like I have like 10,000 stickies on a book when I want to remember things, or
Sure, sure.
even when I read fiction, I mark things. Like the Mitford series is one of my like go-to, because I need to just zone out, and so I'm always marking things.
Yeah, I do that with the sticky tabs too.
I know. Then I pull out a book and I'm like, oh, I wonder why I marked this.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't write in a book yet. It's nice. I still can't do
Mhm.
it. I
Right.
know I'm allowed, but I still struggle with that as a librarian.
Just FYI, the book is also available on Hoopla. So anyone that has a CCLD card could get the audiobook from Hoopla. It's a service that we have, and I think Corning Library also has it. So if you have a Corning Library card, you could get it. And then Libby, there's the regular ebook is in there. Just FYI, if anyone likes the digital option.
Mhm.
Really, more than anything, I just want you to read little kid stuff sometimes, so that you know what your grandkids and go read Pete the Cat and laugh.
Yep.
Or Elephant and Piggy. I know. Or Dogman.
Yeah.
I have 85 holds on Dogman right now. It's ridiculously silly. It's always a good read. And then, sometimes if you see a kiddo in the grocery store and you're like, hey, did you read Pete the Cat, that Christmas one? And the kid will go, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if there are no further questions, Mary Ann, this was fascinating. Thank you so much for doing this book review. I think it was something that really promotes a lot of thinking and wanting to investigate.
It really does make you think about the future and the past. There are, all those years ago, there's certainly similarities in what that culture went through and our culture is facing now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Very interesting.
Thank you all. It was so good to see you. Bye, Dr. and Mrs. Prusso.
Was fascinating. Another comment from chat.
Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate you having me in. Anytime you want to talk about books, just call Mary Ann, the librarian. I apologize for my technical difficulties. My poor secretary is like, oh, this is the third day in a row. You would think.
Oh, no.
I know. And it never happens, only when you're trying to do something cool, Thank you all.